CAP 27. So CAP 27 allows first-class multiplex accounts. This was included in Protocol 13, and it basically allows services to map a single Stellar account to multiple users, and it could make custodial solutions a lot easier to build. On the other hand, we also have SEP30, which is a recovery signer. And this defines an API that enables a user to regain access to a Stellar account after losing a private key without providing a third-party control of the account. We're actually really lucky to have the key architect for SEP30, Lee, from the SDF, joining us today. And this solution in particular is something that could make non-custodial solutions a bit easier. So kind of checking in on where things are at and also thinking about these two new technical developments, this is going to be the focus of our discussion today on custodial versus non-custodial solutions. So with that, I would love to get started. And I would love to start by having our fantastic guests join us. I will call you out just because we're on screen and not in person. So if I can invite Marco to start us.
Hello, thanks for having us here. My name is Marco. I am one of the co-founders at Saldo MX and anchor service for the Mexican peso.
Wonderful, thanks Marco. All right, how about Meinhard next?
Yeah, so my name is Meinhard and I'm the CEO and founder of Satoshi Pay. And recently we launched D-Transfer, which is a B2B cross-border money transfer service. And that's kind of the main focus of what we're doing right now.
Awesome. And I actually forgot, I said that I was going to ask a special surprise question. So we'll come back to you, Marco, and this goes straight to you, Meinhard. Any new quarantine hobbies that you've picked up over the last 9 months? We'll say 2020 new hobbies.
Not strictly a hobby, but I meditate every day. So that's something I picked up.
Great.
This time, yeah.
Awesome. Marco?
Well, this is exactly, not a hobby either, but I've been like learning a lot of cooking in these past few months. So yeah, and I enjoy it. So happy
Hopefully other people are enjoying it too. That's awesome. That's great. Cool. And then I will turn it over to you, Christian.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Christian, the CTO and co-founder of DStock. So we do tokenized securities, such as Apple and Tesla, and make them tradable on the DEX. And yeah, we're live since, I think, now 2 or 3 months, and have looked deep into custodial solutions quite lately.
Great. And any quarantine hobbies that you picked up?
Not really hobbies. So actually, the thing is, in Germany, there was a lockdown of schools as well. So I was like, after doing a lot of cryptographic maths in the last year, I was doing a lot of primary school maths this year when I had to teach my daughter. So that has become my hobby.
That's fair enough. That's good. All right. And so next, I'll hand it over to Justin from the SDF.
Hi, I'm Justin, head of ecosystem at the Stellar Development Foundation. Excited to be here. Obviously, well, my team, we care a lot about what the ecosystem is doing. And whenever there are improvements or changes, part of what we try to find out is whether they work for the ecosystem and also how to get them out there so that everybody's using them in a way that makes things interoperable. So very interested to hear people's feedback. My quarantine hobby so far is asbestos remediation.
That's an important hobby. I hope everyone checks in on. Any homeowner should make sure to develop that hobby.
I live in an old house, and it turns out there was a lot of asbestos, and that just becomes a consuming thing.
It can, yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then last but not least, Lee.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lee McCulloch. I'm a software engineer at the Stellar Development Foundation, and I contribute to SEPs like SEP30, SEP10, and yeah, I'm just really interested in custodial and non-custodial solutions and how we make them interoperable.
Well, sounds like you're in the right place, Lee. But you don't get away without letting us know if you have any quarantine hobbies as well.
Similar to Christian, definitely became a teacher as well. So
Okay, those are skills that will pay off though, I'm sure. So that's great. I myself picked up skateboarding and this thing called a ripstick a little bit. That's kind of like a cool, that was, a good way to, when maybe there's no commute, it was a nice way to spend the afternoons after work. So, okay, great. Well, I would love to dive in, I guess, straight into the meat of it, which is, I'd love to hear what each of you are doing for your current custodial strategy with dstock and Saldo and Satoshi Pay, and maybe a little bit about why you chose that approach and how you're thinking about things now moving forward. So, Meinhard, perhaps we'll start with you.
Sure. So at Satoshi Pay, we essentially have three major services. One is the micropayment service that we're known for, micropayment for digital content. Then there's obviously the Solar wallet, open source Stellar wallet. And then recently there's D-Transfer. And all of them use a wallet solution that's self-custodial. And I'm saying self-custodial here because internally we use that word instead of non-custodial, because we think non-custodial is a bit misleading, because there is a custodian, which is yourself. And so we chose to be self-custodial, essentially just to have everything be software, and all the trust is in software and not in any external party, not even us. This helps us to move further or to release products to the market much quicker, and also has removed a huge overhead in potential regulation or regulatory requirements that we have to fulfill. So we can just push out the software and sort of have people manage their own private keys, and therefore, being really just a software provider in that sense. I mean, that being said, so for D-Transfer, we recently also released a self-custodial solution on Monday, actually, to production. And here we really give users the full control over the funds. And also the reason, again, is a regulatory one. However, in the future, we plan to give users a choice, maybe that they can either have a custodial solution by us or by some other external custodial party that we partner with, or even combine both approaches.
That's super interesting. I mean, is that something that would be a relatively easy opt-in decision to kind of automate from a back-end perspective, or would these need to be two totally separate kind of infrastructure solutions?
So, yeah, so the combination would be very separate, or not very, but pretty separate legal, let's say, connections that we have with our users. And also technically it would be quite different. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's also where the different caps and SEPs come into play, each on their side. So it's going to be quite some development work, and also some let's say, legal groundwork that we have to lay first.
What is motivating you to consider adding this second solution where you provide custody?
Mainly user experience, because a lot of the customers we have are not familiar with this sort of power that self-custodial has. So also the power to lose your money, essentially. And that is something we want to maybe give users the choice if they want to be in full control, or if they trust us with a certain amount of their money, or even all of their money, more like a bank-like service. It's also, right now, we didn't find a custody partner yet, and also we're not regulated in that way. So we can't actually legally launch a custodial solution at this point, but we can launch the self-custodial. And that's why we moved forward with that. With that, we can now handle bigger transactions as well. As much as there's digits in the, let's say, Stellar code, we can add like even very large amounts if we want.
That's great. I really want to dive into some of those points more, specifically around the usability side of things. And I'm also kind of curious to hear, for the users that you think would want a non-custodial solution, kind of what is a driver or motivator there as well. But maybe let's go ahead and jump to Marco to get a little bit more of our landscape about where we're all currently, or where you're currently sitting.
Yeah, thanks. Philosophically, I'm personally very aligned with the self-custody movement that cryptocurrency has started. And I don't see, for example, in single asset blockchains such as Bitcoin, the need of thinking through like custodial solutions. But however, I've seen Stellar since the very beginning, seeing and realizing the market opportunity of representing real world assets on this public network and allow exchanges and transfers, and that requires a lot of companies like ours that are regulated entities capable of holding value on the behalf of their users to participate. And the needs actually that these companies have is they're very different, because like they want to leverage this ability to hold people's funds and be able to like improve usability as much as possible, and remove any friction that can be created by the self-custody approach, which we all know very well. And I think what we've seen is under development, especially from the ecosystem of standards that can help expand those custodial solutions, and I think that's something that we should think through more and focus, because the same way that in cryptocurrency has been like expanding thanks in big part to exchanges, which are custodial solutions. I think that at the end of the day, it will be extremely beneficial for all if more custodial solutions are able to adopt the kind of the Stellar protocol in a way that makes sense for them, and in that way increase the use of the whole network and benefit, including like those players that are using self-custody solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, it's, I think there is kind of a philosophical point of tension here where, I think many of the people within the Stellar community really like the financial sovereignty that blockchain can provide. But there's also typically a deep desire to create impact, to use a platform like Stellar to provide more access to financial products and services for everyone, right? And so how do we do that in really simple ways, or how do we do that in ways that work across user types outside of just people who really understand cryptocurrency? So, but Marco, can you help clarify how does Saldo actually work? How are you set up right now?
Yeah, so we as an anchor support like both like approaches. So if someone wants to utilize our services through a non-custodial solution like Lobster, they can go ahead and do it. But we're also maintaining a service that it's called SMX, that it's our custodial solution that we believe it's really important for the business development of our company. So that basically is a very easy way to use a wallet that allows especially Mexicans who are in the US working hard and sending money over to hold a little bit of Mexican pesos in a digital way. And that replaces the need to go and cross the border and open a bank account, which is almost impossible for the majority of them. So like we are really focusing on this community, which is not tech savvy, is not part of the crypto community at all. And we've been like super motivated from what we've seen. And this is a community that actually could not care less about like the self-sovereign aspect of crypto, but they just want like the task to be done. And so we've been like developing these with these people in mind, and that's for our company a big focus right now. And we also want to make it compatible with any other Stellar based solution. But in our approach, this is a fully custodial way of doing of using our anchor.
Gotcha. And it sounds like you already have some thoughts on where there could be more support within the Stellar ecosystem for being able to kind of launch these types of products.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of interesting discussions like the like multiplexed accounts that you mentioned. But probably and I'm sure we will talk more about this later on. But I think that it's in general very interesting just to kind of like see what the users are doing and just like see that basically the entire world it's gonna take a long time for the majority of people to adopt like the self-custody tools out there. And I think that we should like be kind of like aware that there's a path towards that kind of like decentralization, and in the meantime it's really important to serve the people that they want to be served in a specific way, and for us, like, we are at a stage in which it's really important to provide custodial and easy to use solutions like this.
Great. Yeah, and I think we definitely will dive into some of these various things like multiplexed accounts more. So great. Thank you so much, Marco. And Christian, I know you guys have had an interesting journey with dstock, so we'd love to hear about what you guys are using, how you set things up, and how you're thinking about the future.
Yeah, I already have a lot of points I want to touch on. So yeah, maybe I can start with, there are actually two different ways or multiple ways actually how you can use dstock technology. So first of all, there's an API layer, which basically everyone can use. It uses Stellar standards and people can build products on top of it. And for that one, we actually don't have any opinion on what the user, how the user protects his or her keys. So we just basically verify the user and where he's coming from, if it's not like a terrorist, something like that, and then they can use their account to trade our assets. But we as well, and that's our actually main product, do have a mobile app. And because the countries we serve, emerging markets, there's a mobile first approach. And this app is actually not targeting crypto users. So if you want to use, if you're a Stellar heavy user and you want to use dstock assets, you can use, for example, the Lobster wallet or something like that. But for really non-crypto users who are new to investing and haven't had touch points at all with crypto in the past, it's actually quite of a hard concept to grasp to create a private key. So like currently in our onboarding process, which is self-custodial, I'm going to start to use this word as well, so thanks to Meinhard. The people actually in the onboarding process have to create a private key, and we see actually some kind of a drop-off rate right on that. So it's like people have a hard time doing that. So I understand they're a bit scared, maybe they don't understand it, and things like that. So that's a problem actually to us, and I think to everyone who wants to build end user product that's not just targeting early adopters. And the tricky part on this one is like in the very heart of dstock is that dstock itself does not hold customers' funds. So that's the basic idea how we can actually pull off the entire business, and that's true for most of crypto companies, I guess, that they don't hold customers' funds and are therefore eligible to cut off a lot of middlemen that are normally required in financial transactions. And yeah, so basically, if we want to go away from that, and we're actually planning to do that, so we want to find a solution that makes it easier for end users. We have to go to some way that's not only self-custodial. And I'm not saying, or let me phrase it differently. So the first thing that we need to define, or that we have to talk about, is what actually does custodian, what does a custodial solution mean in this case? And this definition isn't actually as clear as one would guess. So we're always talking about, okay, there's self-custodial and there's self-custodial solutions and custodial solutions, but the definition of custodial is quite a bit more complex. So I've read it a bit. For example, the BaFin, which is the German equivalent, roughly the German equivalent to the SEC in America, defines custody as someone who's holding funds on behalf of other people, is able to transfer them, make payments with that, and all this kind of stuff. And holds a private key that's eligible to do that. And for example, in step 30, that's where you say, okay, we're splitting off weights between multiple third parties that need to jointly recover a key for a user. That's not really that definition. So it's not really clear if that's actually a custodial solution that would require regulations. So like by the very definition of financial regulators, it may not be, but it's actually not that clear because it's just basically new land. So nobody has actually challenged that. Maybe the regulators weren't even aware that they are weighted keys, things like that. So it's the entire field is not as easy as it gets. So for us, it's like very crucial to find a solution where we say, okay, people will be able to recover the key, but I wouldn't call that a custodial solution because the people do not hold the funds of the user in custody. They're not able to transfer them, doing stuff with that, and more importantly, they are not able to then they don't have to do insurance and things like that for it. So yeah, that's the basic thing around it. So custodian solutions or non-custodial solutions is not the only thing in the realm. It's as well just mainly for us about key recovery that we want to try to solve.
That's great. I mean, I guess I'm curious, do you, Meinhard or Marco, have kind of like a similar opinion or reaction to that
I think
sense of key
this
recovery?
point is extremely relevant and interesting because, for example, I think that for a lot of regulators, the fact that a user of a regulated entity actually goes and does something and loses the private key is not sufficient, like for the regulator to just be fined. The legal obligation, that the company has still is a valid payment obligation that the company needs to honor. So I think it's not sufficient just to like it's like the key management will not remove or will not go away that legal kind of like obligation that some custodial companies have, and that it's something that it's very like valid across like all the kind of like real world assets, including currencies. And I think like at that point, like you realize that somehow, for example, if a user of our anchor loses like the private key and you still see the funds, you at least need to show that you have a process to be able to in a way cancel those funds or do something with that account, and then like credit back those tokens to the new or like rekey kind of like like doing those things. It helps companies like ours to comply with local regulations that are not aware of like what private keys can do. And I think it's like super interesting and makes companies like ours realize that it's a very complex topic.
That's an interesting point to make. So, oh, you go first, Meinhard. Okay, that's an interesting
because.
Okay. No, I'm muting.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. Sorry for that. That's an interesting point to raise. I mean, when you're anchoring an asset, you always have the option to freeze it. And okay, it's still on chain, and it's a bit harder to keep track of it, but it's still in an automated way. You can prove that these assets are frozen when you, for example, cannot take away trust lines. And then you can issue the assets new, and it's somewhat of a cumbersome way. It may be easier in the future because there are some proposed changes to Stellar to reclaim assets, but this is some way for us, for example, to recover funds at the moment, even if the people lose their key in the self-custodial solution. The problem is actually not from that, so we can always do that. The problem is merely if the user just, for example, deposits $1 million in XLM and then loses his key or her key, or the same for stablecoins who may not be able or up to this process. So, but the interesting idea of just freezing the assets and reissuing them to a new account is always an option as well. That's So you don't have to, so that you just give up the old account when you lose the key.
Just on that briefly, obviously you need to flag the asset as being revocable, and yeah, there's asset types where where there's configurations where you don't have that. So if you forgot to do that, or if you didn't plan for that, then obviously that's not possible either. So what we've done in our micropayments product, actually, we used a little bit of a trick there. So we are co-signing all the transactions that are being done for the micropayments wallets. And we also have a time-locked transaction that we issue with each payment, meaning that after a certain period of time, the funds will return back to us if no other transactions have been made, meaning that if a user loses a key and they flag us, they tell us that they did so, we will simply not co-sign any transactions from that key anymore. And then after half a year, I think it's currently the time that we have programmed, we can then recover these funds. That means we can issue even lumens to the users from, we kind of give out a bit of our liquidity beforehand, but in that way we can also sort of have a account recovery for accounts that actually are lost, but the funds will come back to us later after half a year. It's a bit of a sort of a workaround for that issue.
But isn't co-signing the mere definition of it not being a purely self-custodial?
Depends on the type of weight a key has. So if you have, you know, like a minority weight, then so I don't know how the regulator sees different types of multi-signatures, because that's also depending on the chain, obviously. Well, it's a hybrid, I would say.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just to kind of respond here, so one, I wanted to flag, Christian had mentioned a cap on Stellar, which I wanted to name just if anybody's watching. So
35,
I think you would, yeah, cap 35, which is the asset clawback cap, which is a new proposal. So if anyone's interested in exploring that further. But, you know, this is really interesting because it still feels like we're dancing around these areas of kind of how can you stay lean and, you know, I would say kind of do things that allow you as an organization to kind of have a leaner regulatory framework as a fintech. Along with things that are more tied to kind of like usability and how do we make experiences for consumers to that can keep their information safe, but still provide kind of like non-confusing, not overburdensome experiences on the product. I mean, do you guys see any other major areas that are kind of I'll say kind of like dancing around the surface here, because I know we're kind of talking back and forth about various designs, but it feels like there's kind of like larger themes or larger questions. So
maybe I can start because I mean we've been like also thinking about this. The problem is that if honestly it is true that it removes liability, the fact that you can actually delegate the key management to your users, and that like fundamentally will remove like regulatory like load. The problem is that if you see what happens in fintech is that, okay, regulation is more expensive than software, sure, but is it at the top of the list? I don't think so. It's like you have software, which is cheap, and then you have regulation, which is way more expensive, and then you have distribution. So if you see like what's the big expenses that fintech companies have, is most like distribution. The customer acquisition cost, it's what sometimes kills like the unit economics. So it's not regulation at all, even if it's like super expensive. So I think that a lot of companies realize that, okay, yeah, there's some efficiencies to be made in that, you know, liability that goes away, but it's not the entire story. So you still will need to go and find the users, and that's like extremely expensive. And then sometimes it's even more expensive if you need to make them learn what like a 12 word password means, or what like a mechanism to like that it's not intuitive is to recover like the secret key for your funds. So that those things will add costs to that very like heavy cost of customer acquisition, or will reduce the universe of people that you can target. And I think that's something that from the business perspective, it's not very positive.
So I have a question, which is basically if you had something, I mean, and this sort of relates specifically to SEP30, which I think is a very clever way to give users access to their account without ever having them to touch a password or know a secret key or use a backup recovery phase. They can basically log into a Stellar account using just their phone number or their email address, some proof of identity, right? So with a solution like that, you know, well, I guess there's two questions. One, does a solution like that solve the user experience and allow you to create a non-custodial sort of interface or solution that doesn't feel, that sort of obfuscates the crypto nature of an app from a user? Like basically, can using something like SEP30 make it so that the user experience for a non-custodial wallet is just like a custodial wallet, one? And two, if it does it solve the biggest problems, or does it only solve some of the problems and there are still a lot of problems left over that would still make you choose to use a custodial solution?
I mean, maybe I can just quickly say that I think it's the final user who will judge those things, because at the end of the day, for me, it's very intuitive to use a memo ID just to identify a final user. But that actually hasn't been the case for the majority of users of exchanges. So in a way, like something that feels very intuitive from the kind of the sign point of view, and this is true across many different SEPs, that for me makes a lot of sense. But once that they're implemented, like things become trickier. And I think that's the only thing that I could say. Probably Christian can say much more.
Yeah, well, I think, well, first of all, I like the basic idea of SEP30, and it's definitely a valid one. We do have some problems with it when we want to implement it. It's one thing that's very common among when we implement SEP. So the Stellar ecosystem proposal, for those who don't know, are standards in the Stellar system that anchors or people building on it can implement, and then everyone can use it, and it's interoperable between different clients. And that is a good thing if you're a client. For example, there are SEP6 and SEP24 for deposits and withdrawals from anchors, and it's super nice. So basically, as a developer, I can go ahead and integrate 10 of them in a day, and that's super nice for me as a client developer. But to be honest, that's not something I care about as a developer. What I care about is optimization of the user flow. So for example, deposits is the most crucial thing in our flow ever. And if I can increase conversion there by 1% or by 5% or by 10%, then I would do that. So I'm not fundamentally not interested in getting this thing done fast. I want to get it done right. And currently, I can't do A/B testing. I can't do client-side validations with deposits and withdrawals. For example, just as an example for SEP integration. So these SEP integrations as a whole focus on clients getting the job done. And that's not what we want to do. And SEP30 is kind of the same thing. It automates the entire flow for clients so that we can just do it and then integrate a lot of other clients to integrate SEP30. But it's not coming from the perspective of the client. So for example, I'll give you an example. Quite recently, I've lost my two-factor authentication on I think it was Coinbase, and that was an automated process. I had to send them my passport. There was a person talking to me, and that's fine. It's something I would expect as a user, and it encouraged me that those people do their business right. Whereas on SEP30, if the ease of the flow is like, okay, my email and or SMS is something I wouldn't fundamentally like as a user to be connected with me. I'm just pushing a tech away from losing my entire life savings when someone captures my email. And my wife quite recently her phone number. She doesn't even have access to her old number anymore. So it's like it's kind of a weak thing for us, and it focuses a lot of it's being automated. People don't have to hassle with it. It's fully integrated. It's decentralized, and that's fundamentally not anything our users care about. But basically, our users want to log into the app, have an account, and never care about it. And for us, it would be totally fine if there would be just a person having an HD wallet in a physical vault, and it costs like $30 or $10 or $20 for key recovery, because if it's below, it doesn't make sense anyways. If it's above, fine, or we could scale it. But having an approach that's just focusing on the client side wouldn't cut it for our users. So we would have to have a process that's more tied to the user experience, and the user doesn't want to care about that at all. I think that's just from my side. I talk a lot, so maybe I keep it short now.
Do you think that there's like I think we've mentioned in a few points that like there's this issue of keys being lost, and then what do users go through to get their keys back? And then we're talking separately about the products we're developing and all of the functionality they provide. Do you think that there's room for custody as a product independent of the products you're developing?
So maybe I can take this one. Definitely, so I don't know if this was directed to Christian, but definitely for us, that would be something we desperately want in the ecosystem. And it would have to be a custodian that supports different Stellar assets as well. There are wallets that support lumens already, and custodians that support lumens, but to extend that to other assets and maybe even trades, to some extent, that would be definitely something we would want to integrate, and that's actually what we're actively looking for.
I would want to make, again, the separation between custody and key recovery. So we don't want to have custody. We don't want so traditional custody solutions work like they don't expose the private key to anyone, not even the users belonging to that, and you send transactions to some kind of signing service to give it back. So we don't want that. We always want to have self-custody and the user be in charge of the things with possession of his or her own key. What we want on top is key recovery solutions, pretty much like SEP30 would offer it conceptually, with multiple recovery processes as weights, where not each weight does not have the option to trade. But I understand where SEP30 was coming from. It was developed with a different thing in mind. It was basically developed for the use case of not only key recovery, it was as well developed for sharing keys and all kinds of use cases that are required alongside when you're not the only one having access to that key. And for that, SEP30 makes a totally perfect job, I think. It's just like for our purposes, where we don't want all of those features. We just basically want at any and in a very seldom case, someone loses his or her key, can recover it. And for that, I think it would be fine if there would be just like 2 or 3 maybe notaries or trust companies, banks, whatever, who would provide the service, and maybe just a call center or something like that, where people could provide their IDs and initiate a recovery process. So for the users of ours, it doesn't have to be this decentralized solution, because most of the users are not crypto maximalists who said everything needs to be decentralized and all these kind of things. One thing, if I could make a proposal that's a bit more technical involved, would be that it's fundamental to Stellar to have counterparty risk, right? So you have to establish trust lines to assets or anchors where you say, okay, I trust those people. So you say maybe for these, you say, oh, these people are sitting in Europe. They are assessed by the regulators there. That's a bank in Europe that hold the assets in custody. So that's great. I trust those guys. I encourage you to do so. I establish a trust line to these stock assets. And maybe that would be true for custodians as well, where you can say, hey, I'm establishing some kind of custodial trust lines where I say, hey, this guy can, or girl or entity can hold a specific weight of my assets, so that you have it somehow baked into the protocol level. But that's just for the far future. For the very near future, it would be just basically fine to have 2 or 3 who establish trust by being used by many of the enterprises building up on Stellar.
Marco and Meinhard, I'm interested if that idea appeals to the two of you also.
Which idea?
Basically the idea of there being sort of trusted professional custodians out there that you could.
I think in general, it fulfills a need. I've seen always Stellar as a very diverse ecosystem, and I think that the problem of like discussing topics of like one solution versus the other, it's like it's not giving the full picture of what's happening. So Stellar actually, for example, the way I see it is that at least in the ecosystem we touch, there are multiple different roles, and they will like some of them like will require something like that, and some of them won't. So for example, like we're thinking, imagine a migrant worker that has the need to send over $200. That's not the same need of the market maker that facilitates like the exchange rates that those other people benefit from, that actually move millions of dollars. So that makes completely different needs, and they're both using Stellar. So I think in one case, like shared keys are badly needed, and in other ways, what some other projects are doing, which is like completely abstracting away, and you know, why would a company like ours would have the liability of the people's funds? That's because like there aren't a lot of funds. Maybe you can actually, because you're solvent, probably you have like you know, capital requirements that exceed those people's funds. So like those things will at the end of the day mitigate the risks and will make you capable of fronting such risks. And I think that's what I see. So in my mind, there's a lot of like sophisticated players in the Stellar ecosystem already, in a way that understand like how the mechanics work, but there aren't yet as many users as I would like to see. I would like to see every Mexican who's working in a kitchen in New York using a system that touches Stellar. And the way to do that, it's in my mind, a product that completely looks like something that this community would expect. And that's completely something far from something like SEP 30 or something like that, because they don't want to deal with that. They just want to like deal with the same thing that they've been doing with other companies when things fail. And that's like the market need that we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just one point that you made there that I do think is really important is that, you know, even when we're thinking about the requirements for just an application, oftentimes there's a whole kind of like broader stack of ecosystem that's required to kind of make that end product exist. And everybody who's in that value chain has kind of differing needs based on what they're doing. So yeah, I think that's fair. You know, I'd say, well, we're in our last 15 minutes here. And so, you know, I think we're already kind of doing this, but I would love to drive the discussion towards kind of identifying gaps or needs, or we can also put these as opportunities within the ecosystem. And so maybe I'll just phrase this in a slightly constraining manner to kick things off. Like, if you, Marco, Meinhard, and Christian could wave a magic wand and have like one new thing exist in the Stellar ecosystem to support your vision of key management, what would that look like? Like, what's the number one thing that you think would be super valuable for you? Whoever has a response to that can start.
I can start by the already multiplexed accounts that we've touched before. It's in general, I think that that's something that in my mind is something that was missing, and I think I would love to see completely adopted. And the reason is because the way that I feel as a user, like the way that memo IDs are used, it's kind of like not intuitive, and it feels like a hack, you know, like, you know, everyone's familiar with a payment app where you can also like include a message that travels with a payment. And so, but in this specific case, we're like hacking that field, that memo field, to actually embed information, and that will make the payment to route differently. So that became like the default way of adopting Stellar, like for exchanges. And I think that the entire ecosystem accepted that was the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if there's a better way to do it, which in my mind, it is multiplexed accounts, we should, like, the sooner the better, adopt something like that, because you can actually free that field, which is important for other use cases. As an example, the first implementation we did for bill pay actually encoded information about the bill, that like the reference of the invoice that was intended to be paid, and that was encrypted and sent over the memo. So it's like, to me, those are things that other players may find like useful and interesting, and will design that way. And if we use that field as just an additional field that, together with the address, will actually route the payment to a different like destination, I think that that's completely, in my mind, something that shouldn't work that way. And some evidence is like people make a lot of mistakes when they're like put assets in and out of exchanges. And I think it feels like it would be focusing on people and companies using custodial wallets, but I think it's the opposite. I think if it's widely adopted, it's something that it would be there available for everybody, and they will like just add a more intuitive way to just send payments to an address with an amount, and that will like satisfy the need of like the routing and all the information that needs to travel with each payment. So in my mind, that's something that needs to be adopted, obviously discussed before, and for me that would be like the
Gotcha. So you're putting your flag down on the CAP27 planet in the Stellar ecosystem. And correct. I don't know where I'm going with this, but you're squarely on the CAP27 multiplexed account team.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great, wonderful. Meinhard, looks like you maybe have a thing next. Great.
Yeah, so also CAP27 is really interesting for us, and that's something, unfortunately, I can't answer. Maybe Lee can clarify. Does it also sort of protect the privacy of the recipients, or is it still easy to like conclude the address that's behind it? Because that is something also we would wish to have, that we have not the complete balance of all of our clients immediately visible to maybe a sender. And so in a way, not anonymous or partially anonymous transactions, at least for the recipient, that would be quite interesting for us. And then also something that Christian earlier said, like a sort of a voted approach or a federated approach for key recovery, or even for a custodial solution, that would be definitely quite interesting. And then you said I should pick one thing, but maybe if I also can say a third thing, it would be sort of regulated entities that are offering this custody as a service and not just key recovery. So that's definitely something that would solve a lot of problems for us right now, because fundamentally we're not really also, because of our consumers' perspective or our users' perspective, maximalists and like you have to own your key. Ultimately, we want to offer a transfer service that passes on all the advantages of blockchain or Stellar in this case, mainly speed and transaction cost, and also the transparency. And it doesn't have to be fully self-custodial in our sense. Like we want to give the user the choice, and if the user doesn't really care much about that, they should have a online banking-like experience and not really need to know what's behind it, and not also having the need to learn new vocabulary and new approaches. So that's like how we want to place our service.
That makes sense. Yeah, I concur that, it seems like having, along with there being some kind of technical aspects to creating more capabilities around key management, there's also potentially ecosystem partners that we could bring in that would really support this as well. So, and then Lee, do you know on CAP27 if it adds any anonymity, or I'm not sure if that's something you're too up to date on?
So I can answer that. not specifically. So there's not like a feature of Cap27 that that would make it any more anonymous than using a memo ID for a transaction. However, the service that's using Cap27, could rotate IDs for users, so they could change the ID that a user is using over time, or you use some other strategies like that. That obviously has some disadvantages if somebody is treating a Cap27, like a MUX address, as an actual address for that user. If it's changing, that could be problematic. But I feel like this is similar to virtual credit card numbers, where you have like a credit card and then you have like multiple ones you use for different merchants, maybe, or different people and things like that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lee. And then Christian.
Yeah. Well, there's short term and there's long term. So basically, we're fundamentally focusing on non-crypto users, and for non-crypto users, convenience is important. So there's a reason why things like WhatsApp are more popular than things like Keybase, because they are just more convenient. Mm-hmm. And users will always turn to the more convenient solutions. All those. But I think that fundamentally the key recovery shouldn't be easy on the recovery process. The recovery process can be hard. If I lose my wallet, so like my physical wallet with my credit cards in it, I'm up for that it will be a complicated process to get that all sorted. So that's fine. But setting up my wallet and setting up my key, that should be the easy part. And for us, like, the easiest solution would be just, hey, on key account creation, when you create your account on Dstock, we would just add 2 or 3 trusted and reputable public keys, and those people do have some kind of recovery process. If I wouldn't be totally filled with work at Dstock, I would right now fund a company, start a startup doing exactly that, because there's a need for that. And like in the long term, I could see that embedded in the protocol. That's the one thing I said, with having trust lines to these custodians, pretty much like you have trust lines to assets or anchors, would be a nice way. Maybe even one could think about that when you have an account and it holds assets from multiple different anchors, that you can say that those anchors could jointly recover your key by depending on the weights and how many assets you have there, as well as asset clawback with Cap35 could put a great job into that. But that's like, it would be awesome to have it in the protocol embedded, but like for our needs, it wouldn't even be required. For short-term solution would be just like literally, hey, let's get 2 or 3 trustable notaries, solicitors, something like that out there that we all trust, and where we say, hey, let's give each trust. It doesn't cost even a lot of money. So there could be like small notaries that are just regulated in some country, and you just say, hey, put them up, put a process behind that you can recover, and then I think we would be fine.
Christian, just as a quick clarification, I'm not sure I can actually conceptualize what this would look like if it was embedded in the protocol. And I know it's like very early stages, high level, but I mean, could you maybe illustrate that a little bit more, like what you think that would look like?
Yeah, well, basically that if you have, so the basic idea currently is that you have add public keys as a signer. Mm-hmm. And what you could do is, when you say, hey, we create trust lines or something like that for custodians, that these custodians could jointly recover your key, even though they don't have weights in your public key. Could be, so basically they would have, these anchors would have a public private key pair somewhere on the chain, and this public private key pair would have the right to recover, just as they would have been added as a signer, but you don't have to explicitly add them as a signer. So basically you create a trust line to 3 custodians, and then these 3 custodians could jointly recover your funds, but you don't have to add them as a signer. So you don't have this kind of multi-signature thing added to your account.
Gotcha. Okay, that's really useful. Great. Well, this has been a super interesting and useful discussion. And I have to say, and I'm sure Justin and Lee feel the same, there's been a lot to take in and digest. I really appreciate you guys sharing your perspective and opinion on this. And I have a feeling we're kind of just kicking this discussion off. So we did have 1 or 2 questions from the audience, which I will get up in front of me in just a second. Oop, not that one. There we go. So I'll just throw this out to everyone, I guess. Can non-custodial wallet apps connect to a bank and have a user receive funds in their native currency? So that's kind of like a non-custodial to custodial payout flow. I believe the answer to this is yes. This is actually a type of payment flow that we facilitate on Stellar.
Yeah,
I don't know if it, go ahead,
I think
Marco.
this is the intention of all the steps that have been adopted. So it's like normally an anchor that complies with the existing steps. What they would do is basically allow a non-custodial solution to be able to get from an anchor services like ours, like for example, bank informations that they can like go from their own bank account to like the bank account that the anchor has, and then that would in exchange give the user some equivalent of tokens. So that flow, it's precisely how today all of the active anchors are doing.
Yeah, you can use Lobster or Vibrant to deposit a number of different anchors because they are already interoperate. Perfect.
Great. Thanks, guys. And then maybe, Justin, this one's for you. SEP30 and CAP27 both look cool. Do any of the dev libraries or wallets support these currently?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and part of why I think it was good to start to have this discussion. CAP27, which Marco advocated for earlier, but has come up a couple of times, is called multiplexed accounts. It adds a new kind of Stellar address at the protocol level. It basically allows a single Stellar account to map to multiple users. It was added to protocol 13. However, it's kind of like we put in the wiring, but we didn't put any plugs or switches, right? Like there's no manifestation of this in Horizon or in the SDKs, and there's no clear way, no clear like methods or standards for actually using these Mux accounts. So they're there, they're just hidden away. And so with those, CAP27 specifically, in order to really be able to use it, we'd first have to build out the sort of platform layers on top of the protocol. And then we'd have to start working with people to figure out how they would actually use those. So CAP27 is possible, but not really implemented in any existing applications. SEP30, on the other hand, which is not at the protocol level, right? It basically specifies how you can split key recovery across multiple different servers run by different operators, right? So instead of having a single key, or instead of trying to, it relies on third parties running these things called recovery servers. Right now, Vibrant, which is a wallet that sort of facilitates USD savings at the moment, mostly, that uses two recovery servers to implement SEP30. But if other people in the ecosystem wanted to start implementing SEP30 in their wallets, this specific key recovery method, we would need to, as an ecosystem, get people to run these things recovery servers, right? Recovery servers, which are sort of the servers that you delegate to allow a user to access their account if they lose their key. So short answer, SEP30 is implemented in one wallet and could be in more if we set up recovery servers that people could use. And by we, I mean the ecosystem as a whole.
I need to add one point. So this idea that I mentioned about having trust lines for not custodians, but for key recovery people, the major change that it would add, sorry, my microphone fell out. The major change that it would add to the current solution is that the current solution, if you add it as a signer, like in SEP30, then you are always getting the other rights as well. So you can always like jointly transfer funds and stuff like that. Having these kind of recovery service at the protocol level, then it would really be just, okay, I'm adding those people and they can give me a process to recover my keys, but they can never do payments, transactions, even if they are colluding or jointly hacked, those kind of stuff. And that would put a lot of clearance on the legal side, and it would make the entire setup a lot easier. You don't have to store keys online and things like that. So just clarifying that.
Great.
Yeah, I know that we don't have like a lot of time left, But I think it's interesting to keep the conversation going, especially because I think the multiplexed accounts can offer, actually, if widely adopted, some level of obfuscation to the payments if like people start using it, because as Lee said, like people can use them as you know, like as dynamic debit card numbers, and it's interesting if the entire ecosystem adopts it, then like people would be sending money over with different M accounts, and that will like obfuscate a lot of the information, which is really interesting.
Yeah, well, it sounds like on both fronts, both on kind of SEP30's key recovery design and muxed accounts on the CAP27 side, we have a lot of thinking to do. I think, you know, as we kind of said in the beginning, this is the beginning of these conversations, or maybe the middle. I guess they've been going on for a while. So we'll definitely be continuing them. So with that, I would say, you know, I think it's time to wrap up the discussion today, but I think it's likely we may want to all meet back here in a few months, certainly after Meridian, and continue this conversation, hopefully making some progress in the time between. So, you know, again, Christian, Meinhard, Marco, we can't thank you enough for your time today and for sharing your perspective. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Halloween weekend, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you as well. Bye-bye.